5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Hello everybody, this is another episode of the BackMarkers F1 show. Chris Cato alongside you to recap the Italian Grand Prix in Monza this past weekend. Another good race, I think, for everybody involved. Not a good race if you're a Ferrari fan, not a good race if you are an Italian, but nevertheless, I think it was a pretty solid race overall. We're going to cover a little bit of the post-race things that happened in terms of the driver lineup news. We've had some changes that came the day after the race, so we'll get through all of that at the end of the show, and of course, recapping the entire race in this podcast. So let's get right into it. And starting off first, just touching a little bit on the qualifying session that happened on the Saturday. I was in New York City the last couple of days for the U.S. Open, so I wasn't able to follow as closely along as I usually do on normal race weekends. But I was super happy and I was super delighted to see that Kimi Räikkönen got on pole. I wouldn't say I was that surprised, to be honest with you. I knew that the Ferraris were quick and that they were really good and they were going to be strong at this track. I predicted that Ferrari would lock out the front row with Lewis Hamilton in P3. But I thought that Vettel would eventually grab pole position, so I think it was actually a bit of a pleasant surprise to see him on pole. He did set the fastest lap in F1 history, and I mean, if you would have told me that four or 5 years ago when they brought these turbo hybrid engines in, probably wouldn't have believed you. You know, he broke Montoya's lap record back in the V10 era, so it kind of shows you, even if you're still sort of a hater of these engines, which I am to a point, you know, in terms of the sound and stuff like that, but You gotta admit that there are pretty powerful engines. So it was around 163 miles per hour, roughly the average lap time for Kimi Räikkönen, which is a new record. Sebastian Vettel, you know, not a good weekend for him. He was pretty upset on that Saturday. If you heard him over the team radio saying, you know, we'll talk after. You know, I think he was pretty upset not being behind Räikkönen, being able to pick up that toe and that slipstream, that track positioning he wasn't happy about. So that, I think, kind of really messed up his race, you know, even in the Saturday, the qualifying session, and not in terms maybe of track positioning, but just his attitude toward it, you know, which we'll cover a little bit later on. But, you know, it was a really good start, and it was shaping up for Ferrari to be the dream weekend. They haven't won in Monza since 2010, and obviously that continued, but it looked like everything was going to be, you know, perfect for them. It didn't turn out that way for them. It turned into what should have been a super promising weekend and a really prosperous weekend for the championship turned out to be almost a disaster in a way for Ferrari. So getting into the actual race itself, you know, let's start obviously with what everybody was talking about, and was pretty much the focus of the entire race was the incident between Hamilton and Sebastian Vettel. And now we've been seeing the last couple of races going back to Belgium after the summer break. We're finally seeing Lewis and Sebastian battling it out on track. Of course, you know, in Belgium, Vettel came out on top, and now, you know, Hamilton had his turn. So going into what was the second chicane, well, you know, first of all, we'll start from the start itself, because I think the start really set up what happened in that second chicane. I think Räikkönen and Vettel both got off equally well, and so did Lewis Hamilton as well. I thought Sebastian Vettel, in my opinion, was far too aggressive off the start. You know, he tried to almost overtake Kimi going into that first chicane. I think he locked up even a little bit as well. But the problem was that Sebastian Vettel went to the outside of Kimi Räikkönen. If you guys look at the race start again, Lewis Hamilton, that opened up the gap for him to go in on the inside, and they actually touched on the first lap into the first chicane as well. I mean, that was kind of a little bit missed on after what happened in turn 2, but they did touch a little bit in there, which kind of really set off what happened in turn 2. So in my opinion, Vettel did far too aggressively. He opened the door for Hamilton to just slide in through on the inside and get good positioning coming out of turn 1. I think it would have been much better for him if what he would have done is cover off the inside, covered off Lewis Hamilton, and then just kind of followed Kimi into turn 1 and then into turn 2 as well, instead of trying to, you know, overtake him right away. I mean, you know, I guess as the old saying goes, you can't win a race on the first lap, but you can definitely lose it. And that's exactly what happened here. And, you know, sometimes it does happen that a lap 1 pass or an overtake kind of dictates the race. We saw it in Austria when there was contact with Räikkönen and Max Verstappen, and Verstappen got by him. That somewhat decided the race right there. But typically what happens is you can have your chances later on in the race. But for whatever reason, Vettel just wanted to win the race right then and there on lap 1. And I mean, you know, this isn't a sprint race. It's a 53, I think 54 lap race. and he would have had plenty of time to get the overtake. So to me, it was completely Sebastian Vettel's fault, that lap 1 incident. And then going into turn 2 when they actually had contact, I have that video here, and I can kind of take you guys along as you're doing it here. Martin Brundle said on the Sky Sports broadcast it was 50-50. Rosberg said it was 100% Vettel's fault. I kind of would say that this was Sebastian Vettel's fault. It definitely was a racing incident. It certainly was no fault of Lewis Hamilton, in my opinion. If I'll pause it right there. But if you guys have watched the show, you know that we're Ferrari fans here, and I do like Sebastian Vettel. He is my favorite driver. But you have to be fair in these situations and say that there's no way that this was Lewis Hamilton's fault. So we'll take a look at it here, and you see Hamilton went out on the outside going into turn 2, the chicane, and Vettel on the inside had a slight bit of snap of oversteer, and then contact with Lewis Hamilton, and then obviously spun around. But I mean, if you see it here, and you'll see the camera angle from Kimi Räikkönen's car, that Hamilton did nothing wrong, stayed to his line. Vettel actually slightly turned in more into Lewis Hamilton, and then clipped the side pod of his car, and then went spinning around. And almost even when he was trying to light up the rears to get back in the race, almost slightly hit Ricciardo there. So that was kind of pretty close. But yeah, to me, this was Vettel being too aggressive here. I think that he should have just slightly backed out of this corner, let Hamilton, because Hamilton did have the advantage going into that corner. He should have let him go by, live to fight another lap, so to speak, and then try and get him on the straight coming out of the 2 Lesmos. But you see it here. I mean, Hamilton sticking to his racing line, and then Vettel comes across, bumps him. And again, it's a 50-50 one right there where it could have gone negative for Lewis Hamilton. It could have gone well for Vettel, and then in this case, it ended up going bad for Sebastian Vettel. So, yeah, in my opinion, I think that accident, you could lean a lot more towards Sebastian Vettel's fault. It messed up his race, and quite frankly, I think it's going to mess up the championship for him. The gap is now 30 points, and I know that in previous years, Vettel's made up a 39-point gap on Fernando Alonso, I believe it was in the 2012 season. So it's not like the championship is 100% over, but in my opinion, I don't think that Vettel will win the Drivers' Championship this year. He's making far too many mistakes, and against a driver like Lewis Hamilton, love him or hate him, he doesn't make any mistakes usually. He's a very, very good driver, and you saw it in this race why he is a 4-time champion, and I think he will be a 5-time champion at the end of this season because he hasn't made big critical mistakes like this. If he's had any issues, it's been mechanical or it's been other cars sort of running into him. I think that he has the mental advantage here, and I think he has the driving advantage as well. Vettel's just making far too many mistakes. He has that slight attitude problem that I think all drivers have. You saw it Saturday, what I was talking about earlier, where he was upset about not being on pole, and then you saw it in the way he was driving in that opening couple of corners. He looked just almost frustrated that he had to start P2 behind Kimi, and it's fair is fair. Räikkönen had the better lap. He's on pole, and he should have backed off a little bit and understood that big picture championship-wise, he needs to stay clean, especially in that first lap, so that he can get a good run at Räikkönen and keep Lewis Hamilton behind him. Because even if Räikkönen would have won that race and Vettel would have stayed P2, it still would have favored Sebastian Vettel in terms of the championship. It would have favored Ferrari in terms of the Constructors' Championship, but I think Sebastian Vettel was very selfish in this race. I understand that he really wants to win this race, as a Ferrari driver, trying to emulate his idol, Michael Schumacher, trying to win in Monza. Of course, every Ferrari driver wants to do that as well. But you can't do these stupid mistakes that eventually cost you a race win, cost you a podium, and a huge gap in the championship now. I mean, with only a handful of races left, this is, again, the championship isn't over because anything can happen, but he's got a huge mountain to climb, and now he really can't make any mistakes going into the rest of the races. And if you look at Lewis Hamilton, you got to really think the last time he made a critical racing error that resulted in him missing out on a podium or a race win. With Vettel, off the top, I can name, France, Azerbaijan in Baku as well. So there's a bunch of these incidents that keep recurring with Sebastian Vettel when the pressure is on. It seems that he's not capable of sort of excelling over top of it and coming out against Lewis Hamilton. So, he's a great driver, and he's have some really good performances this season, but push comes to shove, it looks like he doesn't have that edge over Lewis Hamilton. It seems like Hamilton just has that, that stronger, I don't even know what you'd call it, but just mentality for him is just a lot better. And you saw it a little bit later on in when the battle between Raikkonen and Vettel, or Raikkonen and Hamilton were going on. You saw it that nice, very calm and composed for Lewis Hamilton. He knew when he needed to push. He knew when he needed to back out of an overtake. And same with Kimi as well. When Hamilton finally overtook him with 8 laps to go, I mean, he didn't fight it. He didn't do something stupid and, make contact with Lewis Hamilton. So there, I think you see slightly the more difference there between, Lewis Hamilton and Sebastian Vettel in terms of their driving styles. But boy, I mean, it was really frustrating, especially as a Ferrari fan. If you ever want to see Ferrari win a race, it's at their home race in Monza, and coming out of Belgium, it looked like they were going to be the team to do it because they just look so strong, and eventually they come out with almost nothing. So a very frustrating weekend for them, I think, and I think Sebastian Vettel kind of screwed everybody over because had Vettel stayed in that P2 position, he could have helped out Raikkonen. Now, would team orders have come into play? Would he eventually gotten past Kimi Raikkonen? Probably. I mean, but who knows? I think one of the reasons why Raikkonen wrecked his rear tires was just because he had to push so hard because they had 2 Mercedes behind him. He didn't have Sebastian Vettel to help him out to play into the strategic hands of his team. When you have that second car in there, it's a lot easier for the team to help each other out in a word so that you can, overtake in the pits or you can help out with on-track strategy. So I think it's a lot better when you have 2 cars that you can sort of help each other out. That's what the whole team aspect of the sport is all about, so that you can help each other out in terms of those strategic advantages. And Ferrari didn't have that. They had Kimi just sitting there. He was a sitting duck essentially after the first round of pit stops. And Mercedes, credit to them, a really good strategy from Mercedes as well. Made the right call with keeping Lewis Hamilton out a little bit longer. And then they had Valtteri Bottas, who Lewis should, buy him a new Rolex watch or whoever their sponsor is, because that was kind of one of the main reasons why Hamilton was able to gain on Raikkonen again, because Valtteri Bottas did back Raikkonen up slowly to Lewis Hamilton, which allowed him to overtake. So there you saw the team aspect coming into play for Mercedes. And then at the end of the race, you saw them when they came on the radio and they said, formation coming back to the pits, and just to show our Italian colleagues. So that was slightly a dig at Ferrari there. But yeah, I mean, you saw in the little bit more organized Mercedes team comes out on top, and they got everything right for the most part, on the race. I think nothing much that Kimi Raikkonen could have done. I still think he had a really good race. Even after the safety car restart, didn't panic, overtook Hamilton again going into the second chicane. But I think the problem for him was that he was just under so much pressure with the 2 Mercedes being there. After he pitted for the soft tire, he really had to push. I mean, he pushed so hard, and it looked like it was going to be good for him because he eventually had that gap over Hamilton, and he came out ahead of him. But again, having Valtteri there and Mercedes being able to play the 2 cars against 1 Ferrari, it just wasn't good, and it was sort of inevitable that he was going to give up the lead at one point, and with 8 laps to go, that's exactly what happened. But, I'm pulling up a picture here. You can see, this is courtesy of Sutton Images on Twitter. You really just see the blistering on Kimi's tire, and this was only the left rear. I think he had it pretty much on 3 of the 4 tires. He had some sort of blistering, and I think a flat spot on I believe it was the left front. But you can see just how wrecked that tire was, and I mean, he just couldn't get anything out of the tires anymore. So he was suffering in pace and grip. You could tell that the rear was just super unstable in the balance of the car, and there was actually a lot of vibration issues for Kimi as well. So he had to actually kind of be careful. If you guys remember a while ago when he used to race in McLaren, I believe it was in Germany, he had a similar issue when he was on some super worn tires at the end of the race, and they eventually just blew up on him, and he didn't even finish the race and lost the race lead. So he had to be very careful to at least be able to get home to finish P2. And then you can see from this picture just how bad the blisters were. And this is only 1 tire, so you can imagine that both rears and one of the fronts as well, he was suffering a lot. So, I mean, really unfortunate for Kimi Raikkonen. I think no matter who you're a fan of, you wanted him to win this race. I think even, maybe even Mercedes fans wanted Kimi to win. And you could tell, I don't know, for me anyways, I thought Raikkonen was just really appreciative of the support and the love that he was getting, because you saw he stuck around and did that interview with Felipe Massa at the podium, and he was very thankful, even though, you could tell he was really disappointed and frustrated. He was still very thankful of the fans So I think for him that was a really nice moment, but he deserved to win that race for sure. I still think he'll get a race win at some point this year. It almost seems like starting on pole at most races this year is at a disadvantage, so I don't know if he can get it done, but there's just a lot that can go wrong here and there, and again, his teammates sure as hell didn't help him out from that standpoint. So if Vettel wouldn't have crashed into Hamilton and been so aggressive, it probably could have been a bit easier for Raikkonen, but it would have been interesting then to see between the two teammates what would have happened. But I think that just overall, you got to feel for Kimi Raikkonen in this sense. But I still think at 38 years old to put his Ferrari on pole and to be battling it out with Lewis Hamilton, he's still got a lot left in him, I think. So we'll cover that at the end of the show because the Leclerc rumors have come back at the forefront of F1 news. So we'll see what happens. But that's sort of the Mercedes-Ferrari battle. Moving on to other parts in the race here, I'm just checking out my notes here. Daniel Ricciardo, once again, unable to finish the race. They said it was a clutch issue, so not necessarily related to the Renault power unit, but, I mean, he's just been having an awful time since he won in Monaco. And he even said post-race he's just looking to get on the podium now. It's not even really about winning races anymore. He just wants to get back in the top three, so a really rough time for Daniel Ricciardo. So, with about 7 or 8 races to go, I think for him, he just wants to have a good finish to his Red Bull career. And they're going to Singapore, so they got a couple more track updates, or car updates going there. He said he was really unhappy with the chassis, so they're going to just go back to the old chassis they had before the summer break and just make a complete change there because he was just really unhappy with the setup of his car. So Singapore, it's a more favorable track for Red Bull, so we'll see how they do, but a really tough time for Daniel Ricciardo. And speaking of Red Bull, Max Verstappen, 5-second penalty for the contact he made with Valtteri Bottas. I'm interested to see what you guys have to think about this incident and all the incidents as well. So make sure you comment in this video below to let me know and let us know what you thought of the Vettel-Hamilton incident and then this incident as well between Max Verstappen and Valtteri Bottas. They came together, I forget exactly which lap it was, but Valtteri got alongside Max, and then Verstappen, in my opinion, sort of moved a little bit under braking and kind of squeezed him out, and then Valtteri almost spun out, but he had to go through the escape road. And then a little bit later, the stewards decided that a 5-second penalty was the right call to make, and that actually again played into Sebastian Vettel's hands as he ended up finishing a spot ahead because of the 5-second penalty, so finished P4. And actually, just remembering now, how lucky was Sebastian Vettel to get that safety car after that first spin, because it allowed him to catch up to that pack, make a free pit stop. And not be too far behind. Had the safety car not come out, I think he would have been a lot it would have been a lot harder for him to come through the field, being so far behind, but having that safety car really, really saved his race and eventually finished P4 and picked up 12 points. So I guess damage limitation after he spun out from the first lap, but still not so great for him. But getting back to the Max Verstappen incident, yeah, I think you got to say that was Max's fault. He kind of squeezed Valtteri there, and he wasn't really that close, I think, to making that overtake anyway. He certainly would have had more room. Verstappen had the inside line, so I don't know. To me, I think that penalty was fair just because he did squeeze him out of room there. It was similar to what happened in Baku when he had the incident with his teammate Ricciardo, when he sort of did a double move and moved under braking. So, that's not necessarily allowed. He certainly wasn't happy with it. He's saying that they're kind of killing racing with this, but yeah, I don't know. I think that was more of Max Verstappen's fault. So, not so good day for him. What else did we have here? And then yeah, Lewis Hamilton got past Raikkonen with 8 laps to go. Fairly easy move for him, and you saw that again. What I said before, Raikkonen wasn't really fighting it. He knew that it was going to happen either way, just with how bad his tires were. So I thought the battle between Raikkonen and Hamilton was really exciting in the early part of the race, and then in the stint to follow. And you saw 2 World Championship drivers. Raikkonen, very, very smart driver as well. Didn't force the issue, didn't try to do anything stupid. No interesting tactics, as Lewis Hamilton would say. So I think you saw a bit of a difference there between Raikkonen and Hamilton. The more experienced Kimi Raikkonen, I think, doing a better job in this race So eventually, Lewis Hamilton just winning a race that he shouldn't have won, but somehow comes out P1. So, good job from him and the team for Mercedes, especially going into a race like Singapore where historically they haven't been good. We don't know this year. It seems like it's harder to determine which car is going to be better at which track. But typically the Singapore street circuit hasn't been that friendly to Mercedes, but they did win last year, so we'll see what happens this year. But a critical weekend, I think, in terms of the championship for moving forward in the final third of this season. Romain Grosjean, if you guys didn't know about this was post-race. Renault filed a complaint, or I don't know exactly what they call it, but yeah, they filed a complaint to the FIA. There was actually a protest that Haas had an illegal floor design. And, just reading the headline to this article, that the FIA was saying that the Haas knowingly used a floor design that was open to protest from rival teams. So it seems like they knew it was illegal, but they decided to run it anyway in the race. So Romain Grosjean was eventually disqualified. So it's showing up as a no contest on the timing sheet, I believe. So Grosjean would have finished P6, but with the disqualification, it moves everybody up. So you had Esteban Ocon finishing P6, Perez P7, Sainz and 8th. And then the big story, I think, for me in terms of the midfield and the lower field in this case is Lance Stroll P9, Sergei Sorokin, first points in Formula 1 in P10 to round out the top 10. A double points finish for Williams. Well done to the Williams team. After such a difficult season so far, for them to get a double points finish, I think, is almost like winning the race for them. So excellent drive from Stroll, and even Sorokin as well. He was right there, just on the cusp of scoring a point, and then with Grosjean's disqualification, finally does score a point. So good for Williams. If they can slowly start making some sort of strides to at least figure things out for next year, then that would be great. But Lance Stroll P9, Sergei Sorokin P10, Williams finally getting a double points finish this year. And another honorable mention I had to say for Racing Point Force India, second week in a row they got a double points finish in 6th and 7th. Maybe could have had a little bit more from Perez, but I think good drive overall for the team. After all the turmoil that they've been going through, we talked about this last week, they keep pulling out the points. So, yeah, who knows? I mean, they could maybe still finish in the top 5 or 6 of the constructor standings at the end of the year if they keep going this way. But a really good job from that team. They have a lot of heart and a lot of determination from the guys working in Force India. And, yeah, they got another good finish for Ocon and Perez. Perez has been rumored for some talks. Of course, obviously now that's irrelevant, but he was rumored with some talks with McLaren, but obviously that's not happening now. We'll touch on that a little bit later as to why that's not happening. And in terms of, DNFs, you had, which was really weird to me, Brendon Hartley. He made slightly contact. I forget who it was. Might have been with Van Dorn. Made slight contact, and his right wheel pretty much fell off. So he was done before the first corner. Fernando Alonso was done after a couple laps, retired early. And then, of course, we mentioned Ricciardo before with the clutch problem. And, yeah, I think that was pretty much it in terms of the race itself. It was, for most of the race, the story was happening at the front, with Vettel, with Raikkonen, Hamilton, and Bottas. So that's really where the focus was. We sort of missed certain things that happened in the midfield, and only after we kind of saw with the Verstappen and the Bottas incidents. But the main story really was what was happening between the top 3. So, a real shame for me if I could just sort of wrap up my thoughts on the Italian Grand Prix. I honestly don't think that Vettel will win the championship this year. You just can't make that many mistakes when you're coming up against Lewis Hamilton, and Nico Rosberg was saying similar things, and obviously he would know in terms of course, he raced against Lewis for many years, won the championship against him. He knows what it takes to beat Lewis Hamilton one-on-one. So, yeah, I just don't think you can make this many crucial errors. And again, it just wasn't a smart move for me. On lap 1, you don't need to try and win the race on lap 1. If that was when we go back to the incident in Azerbaijan, there was only a handful of laps to go. So I don't have a problem with that. You're going for the race win. Yeah, go for it. If that's the difference between finishing 1st and 4th, then, that's what you're racing. That's why you're a racing driver. You want to go for those gaps. But when it's on lap 1 and you have another 55 laps to go, you need to think big picture championship wise, and I think that's what Mercedes do the best. Is even when they don't have the pace, they don't have the right setup on the car, they would rather settle for a P3 or a P2 in terms of doing something stupid, and at least they can come back the next weekend, fight another day, and get a better result. But I feel like with Vettel and sometimes the team Ferrari itself, they just make these stupid mistakes and these unnecessary risks, and it could have been a lot worse for Sebastian Vettel. He could have not finished the race. Had the safety car not come out, or had he had more serious damage, it could have been even worse for him. So I think he was lucky to finish P4, even though the gap is still 30 points, which again, it's quite a big gap, right? I mean, Vettel has brought that gap. Excuse me, Vettel in past has shortened that gap. It's been even larger in past championships, but I mean, that is a pretty big gap, and especially coming out of Belgium, we thought that would be shortened a lot, and it could have been had that Ferrari kept that first two positions, but yeah, he screwed it up once again. So really disappointing if you're a Ferrari fan. Overall it was disappointing, but Mercedes and Lewis Hamilton are looking pretty good at the moment for a fifth World Drivers' Championship. And yeah, so comment in the video below. Let us know what you thought of the Italian Grand Prix, what you thought of the Hamilton-Vettel incident. Whose fault was it? Was it a racing incident? Should Hamilton have gotten a penalty? Or is Sebastian Vettel just being too aggressive in that terms? So let us know what you think. And let me know what you think. Can Vettel still pull off this championship? Or is it too late? Has he made too many mistakes that's eventually going to cost him? So I'm interested to see what you guys have to think. Reading some of the comments and the tweets after the race, a lot of people had mixed reactions. So, but I think what people were saying too, it's important to kind of try and put your bias aside and really look at it from an objective perspective. So try and do that when you're obviously giving your opinions on these types of incidents. And then of course the Verstappen Bottas incident as well. Who was at fault, and was the 5-second penalty fair? Again, I think it was in that battle itself. So before we go, just a couple F1 news and rumors. So the big news that happened coming out on Monday, the day after the race, was that Stoffel Vandoorne will not be returning to McLaren in 2019. He will be replaced by Lando Norris, who is the reserve driver for McLaren. You guys might have saw him in the FP1 session in Belgium. So again, Vandoorne will not be returning to McLaren. Norris will replace him in McLaren. So the final confirmed driver lineup for McLaren will be Carlos Sainz and Lando Norris. Not much of a surprise, I think. I think Stoffel Vandoorne was in the hot seat this year. I still think that he's an excellent driver. He's a GP2 champion, and he was really, wrecking a lot of people in the junior formulas. He was super talented, but that's just the problem. I think he was maybe right team, wrong time. McLaren really struggling in this era, so maybe in a different team or in a different era, he would have been. I still think that he's a Formula One quality driver. Last year, he showed it a lot of the times. He's closer to Fernando Alonso than I think a lot of people might think. Many teammates haven't been able to challenge Fernando in that way like he did in 2017. So I think Vandoorne, super great quality driver, which is why I think we need to have more teams. We need to have more drivers on the grid so that we can get these guys, F1 seats. We shouldn't be talking about Esteban Ocon potentially losing a seat. Kvyat not being in F1 and now Vandoorne not being in F1. We should have more drivers on the grid because we have a lot of talented drivers, old and young as well. So why not put them all on the grid and have them go racing? That's what we want to see. So unlucky for Vandoorne, but I hope that down the road he can have another crack at Formula One, and I'm sure that he will because that talent is definitely there. So I think a lot of teams will recognize that. And then the Charles Leclerc rumor again. We've talked about this now for probably since Canada, but of course rumors that Leclerc was going to replace Raikkonen at Ferrari, and then Raikkonen went on this terrific run. Of course, just a side note as well, shout out to Kimi Raikkonen, 100th podium in Formula One, just joins a handful of drivers who achieved that. So well done to Kimi Raikkonen. But yeah, Raikkonen went on that super form after the Canadian Grand Prix, finished on the podium 5-6 races in a row. And the Leclerc to Ferrari rumors kind of quieted down. But now, after Monza, they've picked back up again. I read something that this was something that Sergio Marchionne, the Ferrari boss that unfortunately passed away a couple months ago, this was something that he sort of wanted to put into place before he passed away. So it looks like, the rumors are back on. So how likely this is, I'm not sure. We'll keep you guys updated on whether this will happen or not. I think Raikkonen, again, showed that he's got more than enough great drives left in him after this weekend in Monza, and I'm sure he'll have many more great weekends ahead of him in the 2018 season. So we'll see what happens. I think for Vettel, Leclerc would probably be, better for him just because he could push him around a little bit easier than he would Raikkonen. So yeah, maybe that's something that Sebastian Vettel wants more, is a young teammate that can easily be the number 2 driver and can just help him out. So we'll see if Charles Leclerc does eventually go to Ferrari for 2019. And then just lastly, Daniel Kvyat, it looks more and more likely like he will be filling in that Toro Rosso seat for 2019. Of course, we're not sure what's going to happen with Pierre Gasly going to Red Bull. There's obviously going to be a spot open there. Will Brendon Hartley keep his seat? Not too sure, but it looks like Danny Kvyat will be a front runner for the Toro Rosso seat. Of course, he's been with Ferrari this season sort of as a test driver. I believe he's a reserve driver as well, so he might be returning to Toro Rosso for 2019, which will be good to see. I like the Torpedo being back in Formula One, so we'll see how that happens. Okay, I think that's about it for us for the BackMarkers F1 show. This was the Italian Grand Prix recap podcast. Next race will be in Singapore on September 16th, so we'll have about a week break without Formula One and then back in Singapore. This was the end of the European season. Of course, we're going to be going to Russia at the end of the month, but afterwards heading out to Japan and then the United States. The F1 season is coming to a close pretty fast, guys, so make sure you enjoy all these races. Make sure you subscribe to us on YouTube to stay up to date with all of our podcasts. Make sure you comment in the videos below and then the videos to come what you thought of the Italian Grand Prix. What you think the championship will happen in the end. Can Sebastian Vettel pull it out, or will Lewis Hamilton eventually run away with it like he did last year? It's getting into really critical stages. Every single point counts now. And if you're Vettel and Ferrari, no more mistakes. There's no room for any more mistakes from now until the last race in Abu Dhabi. So the pressure is on for sure. So Singapore will be a really interesting race, and we'll be back next week with your preview and looking ahead to that race as well. As always, we appreciate you guys listening. We appreciate you guys following. Make sure you check out all of our social media pages. It's at TBMF1 Show on Twitter and on Instagram. We're also on Facebook on the BackMarkers F1 Show, and of course our podcast you can find on iTunes as well, and YouTube, which is our main platform. So like it, share it with your friends, and tune in each and every week for our podcast. Thanks again, guys, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye for now.